everyone, and welcome to our first BIBA Talks for 2021. We are very excited to be partnering again with PwC to bring you another informative session regarding digital transformation. Today we're focused on the topic e-Readiness digital ID. And of course, this is very timely given the signal that's been sent by our Prime Minister that we are going to be adopting a digital ID, a biometric digital ID, within the first quarter of this year. So we are very happy to have with us today Mr. Arnold Naranjan, who is the partner of Government and Public Services with PwC Eastern Caribbean. Arnold has 29 years experience in project assurance and managing the implementation of large-scale projects in the public sector, fraud and forensic investigations, corporate governance, structuring, company operations, appraisal, operations and internal auditing, risk management, process improvement, and strategic technology planning. So welcome, Arnold, and we're very happy to have you with us here today. From PwC India, those of you who attended our last session would be familiar with Rajat Chowdhury. Rajat is a partner in PwC Government and Public Sector Advisory Practice. He specializes in managing large-scale government transformation projects and advises national and international governments on digital interventions. He has led several marquee engagements with globally diverse cross-cultural teams. So welcome again, Rajat. Thank you for joining us. And Rajat is joined by another partner from PwC, Varun Paul. Welcome, Varun. Unfortunately, the fourth PwC representative, Ms. Zia Patton, who those of you who attended last time would be familiar with, she was unable to join us at the last minute, so unfortunately, she's not here with us this morning. We're also welcoming from representing MIST, this time we have with us Mr. Antonio Lithcott, who is the project manager for the data processing department at MIST. And Antonio is also the founding partner and principal consultant at North Point Consulting, where in this capacity, he has the responsibility for leading strategic projects and programs for local and regional clients. And then, of course, last but not least, we have our very own Jamar Arthur Selman, who is the first vice president of BIBA, and Jamar is going to be the moderator for today's session. But before we get into the moderated session, I'm going to invite Arnold to deliver a short introduction regarding what we're doing here today. Arnold, over to you.
Yeah. Hi, Arnold, you're muted.
You're on mute, Arnold.
You know, that has become such a favorite phrase, you on mute, you know. Morning, welcome all. Thank you very much, Kamal, for your introduction. Let me say, first of all, that PwC, we are happy, very, very happy to be sponsoring and to be part of what is really a three-part session that we have planned with the Barbados International Business Association, and together with MIST, Ministry of Innovation, Science, Technology. So we are proud to be part of the proceedings. By way of context, we are in the second of a three-part series that we had planned. The first one that we did 2 months ago spoke to a digital nation. And that was really to convey to the audience what it means for Barbados and its ambitious plans to become a digital nation. So we went into what it means and the trajectory that would be required for Barbados to become that digital nation. The second one that we are on today, we are looking at a key enabler. That key enabler is identification, it's ID. And we are going to discuss and highlight what it is, what it means. Identification is key. Digital, which comes before ID in this case, but digital is really just the means to the end. Digital is really a ubiquitous kind of term now, and it's going to be so pervasive in everything that we do. So ID and digital ID is another step really that we are undertaking to get into this digital nation status. The third session that we will have in another 2 months or so will really then talk to the mechanics of operating in a digital enabled country, how it all comes together. So we'll have more details. BIBA will share more details on that as we get into it. I must say that NIST is a key architect of the government of Barbados and the Prime Minister's office, key architects of creating this digital Barbados. It's an exciting journey, I think, that Barbados is has embarked on, and it promises to have significant benefits by keeping Barbados in the game. BIBA allows stakeholders and its community to come together. PwC supports this as a stakeholder, and we are happy to facilitate collaborative efforts to get Barbados to where it has to be. A rising tide lifts all vessels, and that's the kind of philosophy that we keep. So this session looks at the major macro and micro issues that allows a successful institutionalizing of a unique and secure ID. This ID is really for all of us who are participants inside of the Barbadian economy and wider society. So without taking up any more time, I will pass over to Varun and to Antonio to take us through over the next 30 to 40 minutes the mechanics of what this digital ID means.
Thanks, Arnold. Maybe I can start with this. If you can have the presentation up. Great. Thank you. I hope you can see my presentation. And Arnold, thanks a lot for this opportunity. What I would like to share with everybody today is how some of the countries are today talking about digital ID and how they are adopting digital ID. I clearly see that in a lot of countries, the adoption of digital ID is accelerated. So we will talk about some of those countries over here in the discussion today. What I would also like to do is kind of also point out some of the key principles that we all need to adhere to, or which most of the governments are today adhering to while designing and while implementing those this program. And these principles are really very fundamental in that sense, and they really help give the right sort of direction to the program and to the government while they implement. The second element that I'll try and discuss is about what would be the fundamental or the core building blocks of the program, and how we need to look at some of the critical success factors in those core building blocks moving forward. So allow me to move on. Well, we know that globally there's been a rise in digital adoption because of various issues, because of the fact that our citizens are going digital. There's a very high level of mobile penetration. We are all using and consuming digital content day in, day out. And also there is a need for the entire digital world to operate in a more trusted manner. And hence there's a need for a digital platform of trust to be created. Well, globally, if we look at, there are about 1 billion people who still lack any form of identification, whether it is digital or whether it is a physical form of identification. And this problem is really big. And, over the years, everybody is trying to tackle this sort of problem, that how do we provide legal identification to every individual? The other is that about 3.4 billion people have some form of ID, but that ID doesn't really operate in the digital world, and hence doesn't have the digital trail. And hence, a number of countries today are gearing up for their digital ID programs. And some of the names that you see on the slide, Grenada, Trinidad, Morocco, Malaysia, India, Philippines, have been in their journeys at different level of maturity, of course, and have been trying to adopt digital ID. And the reason why they say they're all trying to do this is quite fundamental. I think what they're trying to not only ensure that every individual has a right to participate in the digital world, but this entire platform provides a platform for inclusive economic gains for the country. In some form, this program will be quite fundamental and would be a program that will help for modern development of the nation. It will not only provide access of rights to an individual, it will enable government services to be delivered in a much more transparent manner. It also allows private sector to start offering their services through newer channels, through newer methods in a much more innovative manner, eventually contributing to the growth of economy. Uh, Even going beyond the economy, we could talk about regional and global integration, and hence leading to modern development of the nation. And hence why we say that this program is very fundamental for the entire digital nation construct. In different parts of the world where this program has got implemented, the program has become a very foundational layer for different ecosystems, for different sectors, because it has not only provided the fundamental support to that particular sector, whether we talk about healthcare, whether we talk about finance, whether we talk about social safety net programs, it has really enabled all these sectors to provide services in a much more efficient manner. It provides an ability to the healthcare workers to uniquely track every individual and carry out immunization for children. And we've seen that happen in real. It enables government to deliver various sort of benefits to the citizens in a much more effective manner, in a manner where they can actually talk about overall inclusion, social inclusion of the society. It enables digital finance to take place in the economy, and the use cases are really there are many use cases which happen. There are those which I showed on the slide are some of the use cases which we see are quite prevalent today. Well, once these use cases kind of get implemented, they really impact three constituents of in the entire stakeholder landscape. And these three constituents are the government, the businesses, and the people. Not only they enable the interaction between these three constituents to be more effective, but allow me to take a minute and talk about how does it impact each of these constituents. So let me start with the government. The government, obviously, because the government has been providing various sort of services to the citizen, whether it is just about providing identification, whether it is providing some sort of a benefit, any welfare scheme, so on and so forth. The way they are able to leverage this platform and provide the benefits in a much more efficient manner not only saves time, effort, and cost for the government, but it also helps them to deliver an exceptional experience to the citizen. From a business's standpoint, the businesses are able to leverage this platform to provide much more services in a much more efficient manner. They're able to provide the services through newer channels, through newer innovative channels, and which not only reduces the cost, but also provides them the ability to capture newer areas and newer audiences which they didn't do that before. To the people, to the citizens, to the residents, it offers obviously it allows them to sit at home. It allows them to digitally operate and avail benefits of the government services, of the private sector services, at a reduced cost, reduced amount of effort and time which they could typically invest into while getting the services. And hence, this is why we really see that a number of countries today are adopting digital ID as a program. And some of the countries that have done this, they have really benefited and they have unlocked big gains, big benefits out of this program. Let me talk about two such examples here. Let me start with India. So India, 2009 is when the program got started. The name of the program was Aadhaar. That was the time this program got designed. Over the last 8 to 10 years, the government has been trying to implement this program. They have been successful in enrolling and registering almost close to 1.2 billion people today. 1.2 billion people have been issued digital identities, which they use on their day-to-day basis to avail any government benefits. And now that this identification platform is available to the government and the private sector, it has really transformed the way government benefits are being delivered. It has transformed the way how we used to avail services from the private sector, whether it is telecom or whether it is banking, and it has really enabled the citizen to sit at home or to get their services at an easier and a convenient manner. So let me talk about what were the quantified benefits which one could avail. If I really go back in time, the cost of acquiring a customer for a telecom back in those days was about 1.6 USD. It has really reduced with the implementation of digital ID. That point in time, it used to take 3 to 5 days for a customer to get a SIM card and get that activated and get through the entire KYC process. Today, it happens almost real time in fraction of seconds. Over the years, the government has been using this platform to disburse mega welfare schemes. They have, within this year, they have transferred benefits to almost 2.4 billion people in India who've been, in general, who've been vulnerable and who have been affected by the COVID pandemic. And over a period of time, the Indian government claimed that they have saved close to $24 billion due to this entire program and this entire platform of an ability to uniquely identify an individual and provide benefits to him in his bank account. Well, through this platform, the government has also not only provided benefits, but has also democratized access to finance. As a country, there was a large set of population which was unbanked, which didn't have access to bank accounts. And within almost 5 years time frame, the country has, and through this platform, the country has been able to open close to 410 million bank accounts, and has been also successful in implementing digital payments and digital finance and overall adoption of digital finance in the country and digital payments in the country. Today, we see within a month's time frame, there are about 2.2 billion transactions which take place, which are online digital payment transactions. And hence, a number of transactions which used to earlier take place in cash are today happening through these digital platforms. So it has not only created a fundamental layer for authentication or a platform of trust, it has also enabled a much wider and a broader platform which is being used as a digital nation enablement platform. Moving on, these benefits have not just been realized in India. There are various other countries who've implemented these programs and who've implemented similar such platforms. Another such country is Estonia. Since 2002, they've been implementing their electronic digital ID. It has transformed from the card that got issued back in those days to a mobile ID or a smart ID, which allows the citizens to access their identity using their mobile phone today. There is a very high penetration of individuals who have access to their digital ID and who use digital ID on day-to-day basis in different sectors, and whether it is public safety, in healthcare, in education, you name it. I think most of the sectors today in Estonia are using their digital ID. They also proudly and boast about the kind of savings this program, along with the use of digital signatures, has brought into the country. They state that close to 2% of the GDP has been saved on account of using digital signatures and identity program, and hence that's the kind of gains that the country is enabling. And those are just some of the savings, but in reality, the entire digital nation construct has come to life because of such fundamental platforms being made available in Estonia. So now that we've really talked about, what are the big benefits and what are the benefits that it unlocks, I think it's also important to realize that while this program is quite transformational in nature, it is also important to look at some of the key principles uh, while we design this program, because for it to be successful, it is important that the entire program is designed and is guided by some of the principles which allow this program to move in the right direction. And hence, over the last couple of years, there have been a lot of deliberations globally to come out with principles of identification, which can be followed by different countries in their pursuit and in their journey of digital ID program. More than 25 plus organizations, including World Bank and United Nations, have accepted these principles, and they believe that these principles are quite imperative while a nation moves or starts or initiates its journey towards digital ID. There are 3 dimensions to this principle, and allow me to maybe take a moment to explain some of this. The first one is inclusion, and it's quite direct in that sense. Here, the first principle or the first dimension to this principle is talking about universal coverage and accessibility. How do we ensure that every individual has the ability on accessibility and eligibility to participate in this program? And we make this program, the access to this program, quite easy for the citizens so that they can easily get their digital identification and then use it for availing different services. The second dimension is talking about the design, how the design needs to be robust, secure, responsible, and sustainable in nature. And there are these sub dimensions to the design that I was talking about. It's robust, secure, responsive, and sustainable. So it needs to ensure that once we issue an identity, it needs to be unique to that individual. It needs to be secure in a sense that nobody can tamper with that particular identity. The platform needs to be robust and responsible in a sense that it allows different ecosystem partners to operate and to connect to that and to be interoperable in that sense. It needs to follow and use open standards to ensure that they are vendor neutral and they are technology neutral. It needs to adhere to and it needs to respect the entire user privacy and security. And finally, the entire design needs to be sustainable in nature. The third dimension of these principles talks about the governance, which is how this program is ensured from a overall data privacy, data security, and there are enabling legal and regulatory frameworks in place in the country when they implement this program. This not only ensures that we provide a legal sanctity to the digital identity, but it also ensures that different ecosystems, whether it is the financial ecosystem, whether it is a government ecosystem, whether it is a telecom ecosystem, those enabling regulations are also set in place so that different ecosystems can start using the digital identification. Further, it also enforces the right to privacy, the right to individuals' privacy as part of the overall legal and regulatory framework. So, so these are some of the principles of identification that are quite pertinent and are being followed globally, have been globally accepted by over 25 organizations. Now, once we really appreciate these principles, the other thing that one would really like to look at is what are the core and fundamental building blocks of digital ID, and how some of the critical factors within these building blocks really impact the success of the program. So if I like to summarize these building blocks, there are these 8 core building blocks. It starts with the entire strategy and the implementation roadmap that the country selects as part of its digital ID program. The other is policy and law, the legal and regulatory framework that I was talking about. The third one is the institutional framework. Fourth one being program governance, standards and specification, technology and systems, implementation operations, and the core infrastructure, which is on which the entire program is going to run. So maybe let me take a couple of minutes to explain what these core building blocks are and how does it really impact, or what are the constituents of these building blocks, so that it becomes more clear in terms of how does it really impact. So the strategy and implementation model for these digital ID program typically talk about what sort of archetype the country is planning to follow, and what is the role of the government in terms of implementing this entire program. What is the implementation roadmap? What are the timelines they are looking at? What sort of credentials they are going to issue, and how this entire platform is envisaged to function. So essentially, what is the purpose and vision that this entire platform is going to meet? So this is basically what the entire strategy and implementation roadmap is going to talk about. And specifically, it is important to look at that while designing the entire strategy, it is important to look at the specific peculiarities, the local conditions while designing this entire program, and also coming up with the right archetype model which can allow this program to be sustainable in that country. The legal and policy measures I've been talking about in my previous slide also. This is the enabling legal and regulatory framework that the country needs to adopt. It needs to be in place while we implement this program, and ideally before we implement this program. It not only needs to talk about or provide a legal sanctity to digital identity, but also look at users' privacy, and also look at some of the enabling regulations in different sectors. So those are sectoral regulations that need to come in place as part of the overall legal and regulatory framework. The third element is the institutional framework. Now, which institution will be given this responsibility to implement, and how that institution needs to be further augmented to implement this program. Having the right sort of capacities and the right sort of roles defined for this entire institution is important for the entire program to be implemented. The fourth dimension and the fourth building block is the governance, which means that how does the set of teams come together to ensure that they are moving into the right direction and are moving into the right goal and direction. Standards and specifications are quite important. A survey which was conducted almost 4 years back in different countries showed that 44% of the countries were facing issues around vendor neutrality and vendor lock-ins. And hence, it is important to adopt open standards so that there's vendor neutrality and there's flexibility which is available for the country to move on and adopt different standards and different products and different solutions. The systems, the technology systems and the technology solutions need to be scalable in nature to look at the future growth, the future usage that is expected to happen, and also need to be, again, compliant with the standards that have been designed or standards that have been approved as part of the digital ID framework. Finally, it is about the operations which are on ground, because those operations is what will really impact the experience of the citizen while he goes and accesses the services. Hence, the right sort of operations, enabling those operations through standard SOPs, ensuring that there's a proper grievance redressal mechanism which is available for the citizens to reach out in case they are having issues, is quite important. The last leg of the building block is around the core information technology, and this is about the infrastructure on which this entire program is going to host and rest. And so while I think other components, network, data center, are quite evident, the only point that I would try to make here is that the entire infrastructure should scale along with the scale of the program. We've seen that over a period of years, our program in India has really seen a very large uptake. And today, because of the scalable infrastructure, the entire program has got scaled and is able to operate very seamlessly. So, so I think I'll kind of take a pause here. These are the 8 core building blocks, quite important for the entire program success, and the country needs to be should take cognizance of these blocks while they are designing their program. Last, we completely appreciate and we completely understand that because of the COVID scenario, a lot of countries today have accelerated their programs and have accelerated their plans to adopt digital ID because they really see the benefits that it could provide in uniquely identifying a citizen, to provide him the right sort of healthcare services, to provide him the right sort of benefits, and so on and so forth. With this greater sense of urgency, there is also a greater sense of responsibility that needs to be taken care of, and hence it is important to understand and follow the principles of identification. We build the program with a very broad context, which is to empower the government, businesses, and the citizens, to enable them to interact more effectively and participate more effectively in the digital world. And finally, provide the ability to the citizen to take control of his identity and to take control of his identity in the platform. With this, I would try and end my presentation and hand it over to Antonio.
Thanks, Earl. Could you bring up my presentation, please? Okay, good morning, everyone. And thanks to the team from BIBA and PwC for having me here to present the Barbados National Digital ID. This is core to what we are doing here in Barbados as it relates to digital transformation. This is very important. We hear a lot about all the services, but what we need to pay a specific focus on how the citizens and legal residents of Barbados have the ability to consume these services. And core to all of that activity is actually having your identification. So before I start, and to follow on to what Baru would have articulated earlier around the building blocks, we have an oversight committee of an oversight group of 5 separate units. These units covers legislation, technical, implementation, communication, and also the final member of that group is, let me pull up my slide, apologies here. Sorry, having some technical issue, and business. As it relates to the business group, we really needed and we wanted to connect to the business community so that they can be a part of our decision-making process. They could understand exactly the approach we are taking. One of the core principles of how we do and what we conceptualize at the beginning is ease. And when we speak of ease, we're speaking of easy, affordable, safe, and efficient. And when we say easy, we know that there are vulnerable groups within the community, for example, the elderly. And as soon as Bajans hear digital, they begin to get scared. And actually in our program, what we have tried to steer away from a lot in our communication is actually mentioning the word digital. It's your identity. And no matter who you are, as you reside in Barbados, you must be able to use your identity to consume services, not only that the government of Barbados offers, but also private organizations. So therefore, when we are looking at persons with disabilities or the elderly, it must be easy for them to consume the services of Barbados. It also must be affordable. As soon as we hear digital, we think about smart technology, we think of fancy mobile phones and all of these. And then persons that may be on the brink of the poverty line, they get worried. How can I take advantage of these services? what I can say is 2 of our initial use cases actually focus on the Ministry of Empowerment and Elderly. So we automatically see the importance of making sure we target everyday Barbadians to be able to consume the digital services that we are looking to order. And then specifically safe. We hear a lot of conversation around privacy. And that is core and foremost to what we do. Every single thing we do, we make sure that there's safety around it. We make sure that we actually have a working group, a cybersecurity working group, who are actually involved in every single decision that we make as it relates to technical matters and maybe operational or procedural matters as it relates to the digital ID. And then it must be efficient. What we do every day, we must be able to do better. If we are implementing digital ID and it actually makes things a bit worse, then we are not achieving our objectives. We need to make it easier for businesses and everyday Barbadians to be able to consume the services that we are offering to them. So I will walk you through and give you an overview of the digital ID. There are 3 aspects that I will be presenting today. Basically what we are doing, why we are doing it, and who is doing this. And I know this would lead to a lot of conversation from the team afterwards, and I will try to keep my presentation short so that we can get as much conversation in, and I can relate to you exactly what's happening in the program. So starting, Barbados is introducing the digital ID. You would have heard the Prime Minister articulated this is coming in the first quarter. And yes, it is. It is coming in the first quarter. As I speak right now, my phone is going off like crazy of activity taking place in this space. And today is the first day of the national pause for the next 2 weeks. And the urgency of this has escalated to a point that we need to push harder and make sure Barbados is ready for any occurrences such as the COVID-19, something that has taken the world by storm, and now you're seeing more people understanding the need to be digitally connected. So your ID card, that is not your identity. It's a token to your identity. It's a physical representation of your identity. And we need persons to clearly understand that. And through our comms committee, we are making sure that we get the word out there so persons can clearly understand what a digital ID means. And they are not scared. Barbados, we have had an ID now over 4 decades. So a lot of countries that would have had challenges with implementation of a national ID, we don't have. We have been there, done that. We are now about to take the next step, and the next step is taking us to the digital stage. And when you think of your digital ID, I want you to think of a virtual card and not the physical card that you see. And as I go through my presentation, you will understand a lot more of what I'm illustrating here. Digital ID. When everyone here did we have a barrage of services, but really and truly, it's three basic services that we are looking to offer, and we build the use cases on top of those services. There's verification and authentication, and then an enhancement on top of that. We're talking about digital signature. When we are speaking of verification, that is something we already do right now with the ID card that we have here in Barbados. When you write a check, the person wants to verify you are who you say you are, they normally ask you for your ID. And you take that ID, you review it, you look at the person, and if you pass the criteria, then you are able to present that check. And then there's the electronic authentication. And this is nothing new to Barbados. We do it at the banks. We go to the ATM, we insert our ATM card, and we put in a PIN. That PIN is matched against what you would have done when you first would have opened the account with the bank. So basically, the ID card encompasses all of these pieces. And what we are doing is now you can take it to another level where businesses now can consume that trusted ID that has been presented by the government of Barbados and be able to make their process a lot more efficient. and effective. And then we're speaking of digital signatures. When most persons speak of digital signatures, and I'm smiling for a reason, we think of digital signature as the ability to take a picture of your signature and apply it to a document. Anyone could take a picture of my signature, your signature, and put it on a document, but that does not authenticate the process. That does not say Antonio was the one that signed that document. What we are doing here is we are creating an ecosystem where once we verify and then authenticate, you can literally sign a document, and the integrity of that document, that digital document, is maintained. It is time-stamped, so therefore, for non-repudiation, you have proof that the actual person did it, and not only did it, they did it in a specific time slot. And all of this information will be logged so that the citizens, they can go and they can check their records and they can see who, when they signed this document, what time it was signed. So it makes things a lot more efficient and effective for businesses when you need to go back and find out exactly who did this and when they did it. So this is what we are looking to bring to Barbados, a more efficient and effective means of signing actual documents. And this does not have to occur between businesses and the residents. It could be between two parties. It could be between you and your neighbor. You have an agreement, a short-term agreement. You can write up a contract and have them digitally sign it. It could be with a landlord and a tenant. So all of these services we are looking to offer to Barbados. So when I spoke of earlier, I spoke of the identity tokens. I spoke of the physical card as a token. And we all Bajans know one of our biggest pet peeves is we leave our card in our pocket, we put our pants in the washing machine, and it's that paper base with two pieces of plastic encompassing it. And that frustrates all of Barbados, because the number of times we have to go back into the electoral office to get a new ID. So we are not only enhancing that card, but we are also having a mobile app. So the mobile app will be derived from the physical card. So they both basically coexist. So if we all remember to leave home with our phone, but will we remember to leave home with our ID card? Sometimes we don't, unless it's in our wallet or in our purse for the ladies. But we always remember, and if you have that mobile application, it has the ability to represent the physical card. So we are not only getting a new and enhanced physical card, but you're having a mobile app to associate with that card. And then we have a number of different processes in terms of if you change your mobile phone, what you need to do, or if you lose your card. And if you lose your card, that mobile app now becomes invalid once it's reported to the EBC, and we have to go through the process of issuing a new card, and then you will derive your new app or that app from the card you would have received, the new card you would receive. But there's a process that we have developed, and that information will be shared with the public. And then I go into the why. As I would have said before, we had an existing ID card since 1973. It has served its use. But we are at a point where we are more digitally connected. Everyone in Barbados basically have a mobile phone, and that card was not very secure. Like I said, it was just a piece of paper with two pieces of plastic to protect that paper. However, we are at the point now we need to enhance that security, and that is exactly what we are bringing with the new ID card. And then I go to why this card is better. And I will speak to some of the security features that the new card will have a little later on, a few bullet points I have on the security features. But we are following international standards. One of the international standards we are following is the ICAO the International Civil Aviation Organization standard. So that gives you some insight as to where we are looking to take the card. The card can actually represent a travel document once the necessary agreements are in place. So you can understand the number of features we are looking to bring with this card. There are a number of other projects supporting what we are doing with the digital ID. And one of the very frustrating things we as Barbadians, we have to, when we change locations, for example, when we move from one house to another house, which now becomes our primary resident, we have to go to the post office, we have to go to the utility companies, we have to update a number of databases or registries across the island with our new location. With the new ID card, we are looking to eliminate that. So once you go to once you report back to the electoral, your new location, that information should propagate through the system. And then once that propagates through the system, when we connect other businesses, now they're able to consume that information, well, obviously with your permission. And as I go further on, I will explain a little bit more on those things. The who will get the new ID card? Basically everyone that legally resides in Barbados, citizens, legal residents, they are also skilled, CARICOM skilled nationals, they will all get the new ID card. There is a process that we will be communicating to the public in the next couple of weeks. Once we get past our fight against COVID-19, we will aggressively start a communication campaign where we provide the public with all the necessary information of how they can obtain the new ID card. What I will say at this point is everyone has to present themselves physically. What we are doing as part of the project team is we are looking at how we can reduce that physical face-to-face connection. Why, and I know some of you may ask that question, why in this digital age you're asking us to present ourselves physically? It's part of compliance. The first part of actually issuing the card, I need to verify that I am issuing the card, the token, to this person that owns this identity. So we need to have that physical exchange where one of our officers will place that card into the citizens or the legal resident hands. So that has to occur. It is part of the standard, is part of what the standard that we are looking to be compliant towards. Who will be issuing? We didn't want to complicate things for the citizens of Barbados. So we decided that we're going to streamline the process as it currently exists. It will be the electoral department. What we are doing as part of the implementation committee, of which I'm leading, we are having registration offices across the island, of which you can do the collection, which will be doing the issuance of the cards. Like I said, that information will be communicated via the media shortly. And we have also conceptualized in this time of COVID how we will do that so that we minimize the face-to-face interaction, just to minimize the spread if we are not on a better place by the time we start the issuance process of the card. But what we intend to do is make sure that the process is as seamless as possible and everyone will have the ability to access this card. I will say persons from our disability unit are also a part of our oversight committee. So our oversight committee literally, it's very wide in terms of the amount of stakeholder groupings we have. We have members of the banks, the credit unions, the insurance companies. We have our ICT and engineers are also part of the team, our security experts. So we are leaving no stones unturned when we decide to roll out this card. As mentioned before, I will mention some of the security features of the card. It's fully printed in a process that is tamper-proof. Actually, I shouldn't even be having this information because I'm giving you some insight as to it. But some of this information will be made public. But literally, it's a very close-knit process because it's actually kind of emulating the process that you would go through in terms of a currency. Because this is literally your identity. This is a token to your ID. And we don't want that to be breached at all. Because as soon as it's breached, therefore the trust is breached. And we, the government of Barbados, we need to be that trusted entity that anyone wanting to consume the service that is associated with the national ID, they can do that with a certain level of confidence that you are who you say you are, and you are authorized to do the transaction that you would like to take place. So, like I said, I spoke on the electronic security features similar to those of our e-passport. Actually, we are our technology is based on PKI, and when we speak of a certificate authority, it's basically the same certificate authority that is consumed by our immigration department. So there's one entity per country, and we are an extension of that for the national ID. So you can see how we are leveraging our ID across various agencies as it relates to Barbados. Some important points before closing, and I open up to a number of questions that I believe you may have, as I didn't go in detail, and I didn't go in detail for specific reasons. We want to make sure we engage a number of stakeholders through focus groups. Some of those focus groups has already commenced. I think we had one about 2 weeks ago with just the everyday Barbadian asking some questions around how they would see a new ID, and they were very receptive as to what was presented. We are in the process of setting up focus group for the business community, so that we can start having discussions around use cases like KYC and so forth. So it's a lot of work. What I will say is our approach to implementation, and for those who are project management professionals, we use a hybrid approach. So in terms of the rollout plan, we use gates, which is a part of the agile, the waterfall methodology. But as we roll out the features, we won't wait till one feature is rolled out and then roll out. It will be an agile method where we are just getting some features out there, and that will be constant communication and engagement with the public as we roll out the various features. So we started with a waterfall approach because we have certain gates we have to meet, especially the cybersecurity gates. And once we have signed off on the cybersecurity working group, we will move forward. But once that process is completed and we implement and issue the new ID card, we will take a agile approach as it relates to features. So then features will be constantly rolled out afterwards. The new ID card isn't something that, the digital ID isn't something that you must use at day one. There's obviously persons who will need to feel comfortable with the services. So there's nothing that's going to be mandated, for example. You will always have the option to use some of the services, all of the services, or none of the services. And none of the services mean that you will use the ID card similarly as you would have been using your ID card as of today. But this offers tremendous advantages to the residents and citizens of Barbados. And we are expecting a high adoption rate of the new ID. There will be that transition process of where we will have the old ID and the new ID, but many services will be offered on this new ID card. And I'm excited so much that I would love to show you some of these pictures, but I know the Prime Minister, she's also very excited and she wants to be able to tell Barbados exactly what is coming. So I will not steal her thunder. I would allow her to come to Barbados and say some of the things this new ID card will offer. And this is where I'll close, and I'll open up to any questions that you may have as it relates to our new, I would say, our new national ID, as I do not like to use the word digital. We are in a digital world now, so using the word digital, it's not necessary. That's the world we live in. It's our new ID. It's our new ID, whether it's in the form of the physical card or in our mobile app, which then resonates digital through the ecosystem. This is where I'll end, and I'll hand over to the moderator, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Antonio, and thank you, Varun and Arno, for speaking. And we're also going to have a lot of questions already in the public chat, which we'll get to. So what I want to do to make this as engaging as possible is I'm going to ask some general questions to the entire panel, and then I'll choose from the questions. I'll go through the questions that we have in the chat, which are all very much targeted towards Antonio from the Barbados perspective. So first, I think one underlying question we do have to ask before we zero in on Barbados is we've seen some examples of countries where this has worked. Are there any examples where it actually has not worked?
So let me take that question, Jamar. Thanks. But there are many countries, and I would say where things have worked and they've partially worked, and every country has its own learning in different areas. If I would like to kind of talk about some of the key areas, and that area could be quite important, and it could be a learning for all the other countries who are on their mission. I think the first one, which I would say, is about the legal and regulatory framework. A lot of countries have felt the necessity of having an enabling legal regulatory framework before they start this. And even in India, I think we had a situation where we really wanted to have an enabling legal act to be put in place before the program got rolled out. So that would be the first one, have that in place so that, not just the program gets rolled out and gets the legal sanctity, but even the different sectors are able to leverage this entire program. The second part is obviously around data privacy. It's a very emerging area, and it's also a very important area to be addressed right from the design. Every component, every data that we collect, every component that we design needs to ensure privacy and security by design. So that's the other thing that I would kind of say. And many of the countries have felt issues around data privacy. The third element is about how do we ensure greater adoption of this entire program so that it is able to uptake, it is able to go ahead and create the kind of benefits or unlock the kind of benefits that we have seen. So a right sort of communication and a right sort of partnerships with the entire ecosystem, whether it is banking, telecom, is kind of must. So these are some of the key areas that we really see in terms of where we would really not want to go wrong, how to avoid these pitfalls.
Perfect. Thank you, Varun. Okay, so now, as promised, I'm going to jump into some of the questions from the chat. I'm going to combine two questions from Hallam Hope here. He was inquiring about the timing for the rollout, as well as the impact of the lockdown, the current lockdown, on the rollout. So I know we mentioned Q1 2021. If it's start of the year, that's probably heading towards the end of March. So the question is that correct in terms of the end 2021? And secondly, how do you foresee the current lockdown impacting your rollout?
What I will say is, yes, the current lockdown is impacting the rollout. What we have done is we have pulled together a team, because this was one of the risks that we would identify, and we are working on the activity to mitigate that risk, to see if, even if we start a little later, we can still register the population in a shorter time period. So, I mean, when we're speaking of getting online portals ready, working with the cybersecurity team, just making sure that the necessary data privacy rules are being followed as to what they would have articulated in their documentation. So, yes, it is the go-live date of the first quarter is at threat, as we can all understand and appreciate. The situation around COVID-19 is very fluid, and if that is to change, we will communicate with the public, letting them know the change and what activity we are looking to put in place. Like I said earlier, to minimize the face-to-face contact. So it is something we are investigating, Harlem. And once we confirm the go-live date, we will communicate that to the public. But right now, the situation, 2 weeks ago, we did not envision we will be in lockdown right now.
Okay, thanks for that, Antonio. Before I go back to one of the general questions for the PwC, I want to combine two questions from Nigel Pierre, who mentioned data privacy protections offered to persons, and I think actually Varun, as well as yourself, Antonio, had a bit about how that's addressed already in the presentation. But the second question was about ensuring persons, especially older citizens, that it is safe, especially when they come to do things in person, because they don't trust digital. So the general question really is, in terms of whether it's focus groups, whether it is campaigns, marketing, etc., how are you addressing the potential uptake in terms of Barbados? You mentioned in your presentation that you expect a large uptake by the public, but we do exist in the community who distrust moving to digital for data privacy concern reasons, and secondly, just in terms of slow acceptance of technology, such as things like internet banking, getting the elderly to sign on to internet banking, etc. So, is there something very specific that you would be targeting with respect to this digital ID to address that concern?
Actually, even before we had commenced the project, we had a focus group with the elderly. We had a number of discussions around how they will use the card. So we, like I said from the beginning, we need to make sure that this is all inclusive, that we don't leave anyone behind as it relates to digital, as it relates to the digital ID. Some of them may decide to use the ID card as they are using it today, and you will be surprised. One gentleman in his 70s, he mentioned, yes, I'm on TikTok, and yes, I'm on Instagram. And really, he said his only problem he has is, obviously, at his age, he's beginning to lose his memory. And having these different means of accessing the national services, it means he has to remember a password for this department. If he's going online, he has to remember another part. What the digital ID offers him now, who is already technologically savvy, it gives him the means to authenticate to all of these services using one method. So therefore, he does not need to remember all of these different passwords and pins and so forth. And I know one of the things that is a big bone of contention, and I was trying to avoid discussion, is fingerprint. One of the older gentleman, he said that why can't we use fingerprint? Fingerprint is something that he's walking around with, and he don't have to remember when he goes to get his NIS benefits. If they're going to go digital, you don't have to remember putting in a PIN. So that was also part of the discussion. And what I did find is a lot of the elderly, they would like to use biometrics as a means to authenticate. onto the system to consume services. But obviously, we need to have a discussion. We need to discuss how we approach it. And we are not just going to unilaterally make a decision around everyone providing their fingerprints. It will always be optional. Those type of, when you're providing your information, it will always be optional. Like I said at the end, you will have the opportunity to consume all the service, some of the services, or none of the services. But we will constantly engage, especially the elderly, those persons that can be taken advantage of, on lack of a better word, just to make sure they understand clearly how they are intended to use the digital ID. And we'll make sure the necessary information is available. They are constantly being held focus groups with these groups. And like I said, the oversight committee, it contains members of the elderly, members of the church, just giving us feedback as to how we are to approach rolling out this national ID. I hope that answers your question, Nigel.
Thank you. I think that actually answered another question Caramel had asked about if digital fingerprints or retina scans are going to be used, but I think you answered that question, and it's still technically going to be decided and maybe optional. I want to bring back in the wider panel now with a different question. Just thinking about this, we've seen multiple examples of countries implementing this, and you listed some, Varun, also in your presentation. Has there been any consideration with respect to the cross-border potential, or is it something that's difficult? In other words, similar to how passports are scanned in different countries when you go country to country, and they all kind of recognize the data that's on those digital passports. Is that something that's also being considered, given that the technology is similar to the current level of passports, that ID can help in both actually moving and doing things cross-border, but also cross-border transactions as well?
Well, I would anticipate, if I could partially answer that, once you have the data in a digital format that belongs to an individual, that ID can then be transplanted onto a number of platforms and number of protocols. If we take, for instance, the COVID-19 vaccine, and we were able to digitally attach the details of the person receiving that vaccine, it is very conceivable that that would now be part of your travel arrangement, and would in some way also be able to be scanned and to be read and to verify that you are the person who has received the vaccine, the type, the date, etc. And that guarantees you a kind of, relatively easy passage as you move from one border to the other. And Varun, I'm sure you could weigh in as well.
Hey, thanks, Arnold. And Jamar, just to answer your question, what you mentioned is a very real requirement. It's not just something which has been on your mind. Using identification across borders is a very, should I say, it's becoming quite a discussion, and a number of countries are today talking about it, and they are placing this as their requirement while they design this program. And while I'm speaking to you, there are already African countries, in the Western African region, which are talking about 8+ countries, which are talking about that. How do we create, a single, not a single, but at least identification system which can allow them to move or allow them to authenticate across regions. So that's about Africa. Even in SEAC, South East Asia, when I recently traveled there, the authorities are talking about that. How do we enable the identification systems in Malaysia and different other countries? So the talks are quite real. What you're asking is quite pertinent. It is already happening around Baltics. So Baltics are already leveraging identification systems which operates on e-IDAS standards, and those allow for cross-border integration, should I say that word. Now, the way to go about it is clearly, how do we all different countries come together, adopt similar standards, or at least adopt standards which allow for this interoperability to work. So that would be the underlying, area for all these countries to agree upon, and that's where they could all start towards this journey.
Yep, interoperability will be key, but it's once you have digital, it becomes easier.
Okay, thank you both. Switching back now to the Barbados focused questions, I have two very interesting ones. Jamel Scott asks, will the government be offering a fee to private institutions to help maintain the system?
I can't say right now if there will be. What I will say is the cybersecurity working group is made up of persons from private enterprises within Barbados. But right now, the focus is on having the technical resources in MIST trained and ready. We also in consultation with Estonia. Some of the members would have visited Estonia before we even started the idea, just to understand what they have been doing and how they would have secured their infrastructure as they would have started early 2000. They have a wealth of experience in that space. We have adopted some of the standards associated with EIS, which encompass some of what the question mentioned around cross-border transactions and so forth. So it is something that can be considered, but right now I'm not equipped to speak and say whether we'll be engaging private Barbados to maintain the system. What we will be doing is working with private Barbados in terms of how to interact with the system. We have already engaged some of the financial institutions in that space. So once we are ready for that testing to take place, then those persons will be a part of the discussion. But maintaining the system as it stands right now, it relies with MIST.
Thank you. A question to Rajat and the others. Maybe you can chime in here. There's been a lot of talk in this space about you having control of your data in connection with, not necessarily specific with respect to privacy, but just generally you having the ability to say no, you having the ability to choose what you share. It's two aspects. The first aspect is there anything that would technically be considered information that has to be shared on a mandatory basis? I'll give a very interesting example. So for example, there's a lot of information that's going to be tied or access things, healthcare, et cetera, et cetera. Would there be a circumstance where there's a certain type of information that's mandated to be on these systems? So for example, I saw a mention of the police helping in law enforcement and police. So for example, if you had a criminal record, is that something that if you presented your ID, you would be mandated to have show up that you have a criminal record, similar to how if someone goes and does a check, a police certificate of character check, they would be able to find that data?
Hi, Jamar. Thanks. I'll take a quick response to it, and I'll encourage others to jump in as well. So very, very pertinent question, and it's a very sticky one as well, if I could use that word, because there's been a lot of talk about what will happen with the data that I give to the government. Will that be held against me? Will that be shared with other agencies? And that's exactly what you sought. Now, consent of the data that you've submitted to the government and what they do with it is predominantly governed by the law of the land. And as Varun said, which is why you need that regulatory framework to understand how will the consent framework work, what is the trust factor, and where will this data be utilized for. Let me pick up a quick example back home. In India, we have about 1 million plus people who have an Aadhaar, which is an equivalent to the digital ID that you talk about. By law, that data cannot be shared by the agencies, such as the enforcement agencies or the law agencies or the legal agencies, for any purpose, right? So that data sits with an authority, which is the UIDAI, or the Unique Identification Authority of India. And by law, it cannot be shared by anybody else other than few exceptions, which are on the financial side, which is also for authenticating people, right? So what I typically do is that I could say that I'm going to a bank to open an account and say that I am Rajat. So can someone authenticate? Can that service be democratized to authenticate a person? That's where it is being used. But the data sharing is a strict no. It's not been permitted by law, and it's not been breached thus far in the last 10 years, as I would know, to my memory. That's been the case similarly with many other countries. The data privacy and the data consent remains a very top of the mind topic. Even in Estonia, there are talks about consent framework, which means that any level of data that you want to have, or you need to be able to authorize the government or the service provider of what data of yours can be used for what purpose, right? So there could be a blanket approvals, you could use for whatever you want, but I should be able to choose what I want to do. So I will just leave it at that, but it's something which is governed by the law of the land, and that's where I'll just stress this one. Varun, Antonio, probably more context from your end would be welcome for this.
So I would say it has been a discussion that have been raised, and in a different context, right? Let's give an example of someone falling ill and cannot communicate. They literally fainted on the side of the road, and no one knows that individual, but they have an ID card in their pocket. As an authority, let's say as the ambulance service, shouldn't they be able to pick up that ID card and scan it and get some medical information on that individual? For example, the person may be allergic to insulin. And these are discussions we need to have, because they are very important around how we provide service to the residents of Barbados. It's one that is obviously a bone of contention in terms of data privacy. However, where do we draw the line, and what information should we allow persons to consume, especially in times when an individual is in distress? So it's worth a conversation. We are not there. Like I said, when we start to roll out the features, we will be engaging different parties and making decisions based on feedback. But this is just something I want to bring to the team out there to think about and to consider. If you are on the side of the road, you have faster, would you want emergency personnel to be able to access certain information from that ID card and be able to probably save your life?
Thank you. I have a question related now to compliance and KYC. I'll combine Glenna and Delia's questions here. So basically what they want to know is how advanced are discussions with regulators in terms of them allowing KYC to be shared. So for example, well, I'll add on to regulators, banks as well. So as you know, a lot of times what has helped with getting the unbanked banked, and what has also helped with increasing private sector business in terms of opening accounts has been the ability, or the planned ability for you to present your identification to one institution, and then just give permission to any other institution to access it, so that everyone has access to that information. On the regulatory end, however, how far are we with respect to regulators accepting that form of sharing? And then to add on Delia's point, when do you anticipate that regulators will equally be accepting digital ID from, be able or be willing to accept digital ID from international clients, KYC from international clients?
We are at an advanced stage in the discussion around KYC. We would have included persons from the Financial Services Commission, the Central Bank, also, and all of these are members of our oversight committee, and members of the Banking Association. So we are in advanced discussions. What the use case obviously is, we don't want persons when they're going through an onboarding exercise to have to bring all of these various documents to meet the customer diligence as it relates to KYC and EML. Like I said, we are advanced, but we have not signed off and confirmed as yet. When we investigated the whole EML legislation, it was very broad, and you understand why these legislations are very broad around customer due diligence and what you are allowed to, what information is required to meet the ML legislation. So we are doing a deep dive on that. We will have a focus group discussions with members of the financial institutions, the utility organizations, and so forth to see how we can get that being completed and pass legislation. We can expect, like I said, COVID-19 would have derailed a lot of these conversations that we were planning to have. So I would say within the next coming month or so, we will be heavily engaged in such conversations as it relates to KYC, because that is also one of the early use cases that members of the business communities have requested. So we'll be actively working on that one. That is one of the early use cases and features we are looking to be onboarded.
Thank you. I think earlier in your presentation, you had mentioned the idea that when you're going to do an update of your information, it's somewhat taken in and pushed to different systems, so that the central area of updating would be I believe the electoral. So how then, and it's kind of a touchy question, but I think it's worth asking. What would be the assurances that people would have? Because obviously people tend to have a general distrust of government and the safety of data with government. In terms of the system, you don't have to get in obviously to confidential information here, but can you give the assurance, the general assurance that the whether it's backing up of data, whether it is the security, firewalls, etc., that everything is in place and the electoral systems are basically the highest level to ensure the safety of persons' data?
Yes, all information is encrypted at rest and in transit. All information is encrypted at rest and in transit. So I could almost assure you that our cybersecurity working team, they are on our technical team, just making sure that these requirements are satisfied.
Thank you. And now I think we're coming close to time. So what I will say though is I want to ask one final general question to the panel, to Arnold and the others, just generally in terms of the rollout as you've seen them in and investigated them in different countries. From the whether to Barbados directly or just generally speaking, we had talked about discussing what would be the top 3 factors that allowed generally the ID to work, but I'm also going to tweak that to say factors that allow a speedy rollout of the program as Antonio and the government get ready to roll it out in Barbados. So generally speaking, the factors that allow this digital ID to work, I think Varun had already spoken to it a bit before, and then more specifically the factors that allowed, for example, in as we saw in India, a very quick progression from, I believe the date was 2009 up until now.
Okay, yep, I can go ahead on this one, Jamar. I can talk about some of the factors which really enable this entire program to get implemented in a more, speedy manner. Obviously, it is, it starts with the overall getting the right political will behind it. That's the first one I would say, because enabling that would really help the entire program to get scaled. The other factor is that, how can we have the registrations, the field level registrations in place as quickly as possible, and those registration centers and those operators are quite well trained. There are standard procedures that they kind of follow, and also there's a decent amount of outreach and information, education, and communication which kind of goes out to enable the citizens to understand the benefits of this entire program, the benefits that they would avail not just by getting this identity card, but the benefits that they would avail by using this identity card once they have it. So once the citizen get to know once the registration systems are there, and once you have the political will behind you, I think then it's about getting to register the masses at scale. So once you have the masses in the system, then it is about creating success stories with with different ecosystems, with the telecom ecosystem, with the banking ecosystem. So our success stories helped us deliver benefits to the citizens in India. In other places, it could be about healthcare. How can they get better healthcare, or maybe fast track their healthcare? So get these success stories is really what would really create an impact. And if we are able to create that impact into that citizen's life, I think this program would then really scale tremendously.
There are a large number of benefits that will accrue to society in general, but there will be pockets of resistance. If you take, for example, the area of fraudulent claims, medical, there are people that engage in false claims from insurance companies as it relates to medical. This is one way of significantly dampening the occurrence and frequency of that. Taxation fraud, untrue claims and filings. So pockets of resistance, people who currently avoid taxes that are in various professions. There will be resistance to some of this, but the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few at the end of the day.
Okay, thank you very much. We are, the time is just past 11, so I've been asked to give also the wrap up for this session. I want to really extend heartfelt thanks to everyone here, for PwC for partnering again with us. Obviously, we can't have any of these things done without sponsorship, and they've been very generous in coming on board and doing their part in terms of just informing and the public and making everyone aware and increasing our own knowledge. So thank you very much to PwC and the team, Rajat, Varuna, and Arnold, and also to Zia, who couldn't be here with us today. She also helped behind the scenes, so thank you to her as well. Secondly, obviously to Mist for taking the time out to be here, and especially to Antonio for being in the hot seat today. Thanks for sharing that presentation with us. I'm sure, even as you would see from even the discussion in the chat, there are a lot of questions, and every session helps to notify the public and increase their knowledge, so that acceptance when the time does come is really high. And then, of course, we have to thank a lot of the persons who are behind the scenes. Carolyn Belgrave and Lisa Bridgman from PwC, special thanks to you. You guys were fantastic in helping with everything behind the scenes. Special thanks to Carmel Haynes, our Executive Director, to Grace Chambers and her team at the BIBA Secretariat, and as well as the technical support provided by Connect's conference platform by Lighting Event Presentation Services. So to everyone, lastly, sorry, to everyone who attended today, we had maintained just over 50 persons. So thanks for the good turnout, and thanks for the engaging discussion in the chat. I want to wish you all a very pleasant morning, and for those in Barbados, and I believe for anyone around the world who is currently in a lockdown or with restricted movements, please continue to stay safe out there and do all that you need to do to survive the COVID-19 issues that we are all dealing with. Thank you all again, and please do have a pleasant day.
Thank you very much, Jamal. Appreciate it. Everyone. Okay. Take care. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.